Just sitting on the streets, especially in that Broadway neighborhood, and watching how many people were walking around, not really hiding what we were doing. I mean, it was pretty much an open air drug market. Everybody knew who was dealing and what they were doing and where they were doing it. I spent probably the better part of about 4 years where I had no permanent residence. Had a dope problem most of that time, heroin, cocaine, and I guess that's just kind of the nature of that. Even when you have a good stable thing going, sometimes you shoot up your rent money. Most of that 4 years was spent in Seattle, downtown Seattle area, Capitol Hill, First Hill. A bunch of tents with the fence around it, being funded by the city program directly and governed by the community within the tent city. And I never was willing to stay down there. I'd always rather hustle my way into a room or a couch or sleep outside than to even show up at that tent city. It was a really, really dangerous place to be. The president and the treasurer, and there was like a co-president, like co-chairperson, and those three, for the most part, ran everything at the door. They also had a couple, for lack of a better term, goons that worked for them in the community, that would watch the entrance and do the intakes with the new guys. Sometimes they'd evaluate everything down to what your drug of choice was, and they kept everybody segregated out into kind of communities within the program. And in those early days when I was down there. And it started, they basically just kind of allowed criminal activity to go on in the open, drug dealing, some prostitution. I've seen people robbed there at knife point, just right. You walk through and it was like a scene from a bad movie. It was everywhere you turned, there was somebody doing something violent, or shooting up, or smoking crack. Somebody was plotting to do something. It was kind of like a protected racket. The guys that were running it robbed a friend of mine right after I dropped him off. I watched them and process him. I walked him to his tent, and he showed up at my house later that night. People get beat up and come out of there all the time, and you have to go find an ambulance for them or walk them up to the hospital. The guys that were running it had been violent enough that they pretty much, when they show up with a weapon, everybody just kind of started giving things up. They ran that place with an iron fist. It was a strong arm kind of operation. Just don't see warehousing a bunch of people and kind of trying to leave them to their own devices for the most part as positive or necessarily even good for the community. Now we've got somebody that comes in and oversees all this extra money, puts in permanent encampments. It's kind of the same hustle. They're making these guys advocate for the programs that give them the house in order to have the house. They've just turned it into a new hustle. You know, we're advocating these people going in and kind of sitting in one place and just managing themselves and rotting. In one version, we throw a few dollars at them and just kind of let them fight amongst themselves and ignore it. We quite literally had tarps around that fence on that tent city. It's just, if you don't see it, it isn't there. Now we've got these pretty little shacks so everybody can see what's going on, and it's this great progressive program, and it's pretty much a warehousing program with its own marketing for itself built into it. The more they parade these guys around, the more money they get, the more of them they can make, and the more profit they can make off these people. You know, it seems to be a pretty dead-end kind of situation. There's no real help beyond having tiny house the size of a garden shed and being left to your own devices. And that's pretty much all I see happening in these programs.